We're on our way to a special place to do some recording. It's just going to be me and the little girl. Lillian is sick, and she'll stay home with the bambino. You're just gonna have to understand that Daddy likes to be as stylish as possible. Okay? He needs to wear a nice rabbit skin hat with some aviator shades.
The Classic FM's charity Global's Make Some Noise, which, thanks to your generous support every year, is helping to support many youngsters.
Well, we've made it to the cathedral. Let's talk about Valentine's Day. Do you guys celebrate it? Is it something, those of you who are in relationships, do you celebrate it? And if so, why? Tell us in the comments. Now, we historically have celebrated, but our understanding of Valentine's Day, I think, we could probably say has evolved through the years. I think now the first Valentine's Day we had together was actually the day I proposed a marriage to Lillian. And so from that, I know it's kind of cheesy. Not everyone does that, but I did it. And since then, Valentine's Day has taken a special significance because that was the day that she said yes to my proposal. But what does that have to do with Valentine's Day as such? I think a lot of people think that Valentine's Day is just a commercial invention created by your Hallmarks and your Cadbury's and Hershey's and all the corporate machinery meant to extract hard-earned dollars and pounds from our pockets for the sake of profits. So we may have a cynical perspective, and I think other people have an overly romantic idea of Valentine's Day. They think it's... I've met people that I think treat it as the best day of the year. Where does Valentine's Day come from? I think there are some people who have written that Valentine's Day was invented by the church. They stole it from some pagan holiday. I think everyone says that about every church holiday now. But I think the real history is more interesting, in that it turns out that in the 3rd century there were a few Christians that were martyred by Roman emperors, and they had variants of the name Valentus or Valentinius or something along the lines of Valentine, as we understand it in English. How did it develop and when did it start? Apparently, it didn't really happen until the medieval times that this whole idea of Valentine's Day being a romantic expression. And it says, quote,
"The love connection probably appeared more than 1,000 years after the 3rd century martyrdom of these Valentines, when Geoffrey Chaucer, an Englishman, author of the Canterbury Tales, decreed the February feast of Saint Valentinus to the mating of birds. He wrote, quote, 'For this was on Saint Valentine's Day, when every bird cometh there to chase his mate.'" To choose his mate, probably is what that meant. In Chaucer's day, English birds paired off to produce eggs in February. Soon, nature-minded European nobility began sending love notes during bird mating season. English audiences embraced the idea of February mating, and Shakespeare's love-struck Ophelia spoke of herself as Hamlet's Valentine. So
it's fascinating that here we are. I think when we were in the U.S., I thought of Valentine's Day as an American corporate invention. But in actual fact, it was invented by the English, by Chaucer himself. And so it's not a commercial thing. There's nothing wrong with setting aside a special day in the year to express your appreciation, affection, and love for your husband or your wife. You can express your affection for anybody. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But where does it go wrong? And this is where I'm going to put on my my cultural commentary hat. This fur hat I call my cultural commentary hat. This is from a First Things article. I read First Things is a journal that I read quite a bit. It says, quote,
"In today's lore, all individuals have a soulmate, yet all must prove themselves worthy of this ultimate gift. Enduring trials of faith that enable salvation by romantic love. Converts on film and the internet preach that you too can be saved. Americans increasingly value romance over the institution of marriage, just as they shun religious institutions for the ethereal appeal of spirituality. But even as we fall out of love with institutions, we continue to have the deeds they once satisfied, displacing those needs onto relationships that collapse under a weight only God and faith can lift." End quote.
So what does that mean? The article is talking about, it's a critique of the elevation of romantic love to the point of excess or idolatry, as we would say. What does that mean? That means that the things that the church used to serve, this concept of being saved, of being comforted, of having peace, of being content and happy with what you have, the ritual, the community, everything, the central role that the church used to serve has now been replaced by romantic love. In essence, now we find salvation, now we find our highest happiness, now we find contentment, joy, community with our romantic partners. It's a fascinating critique where there's been a one-for-one swap. So what's interesting from the postmodern family's perspective is these things have a tendency to fail. All you need to see is the record of broken marriages in the West, where I think it's greater than a 50% failure rate. Clearly marriages fail, clearly partners fail, and they don't provide fulfillment that something else might that doesn't fail. So ultimately you have to ask the question, what should be your source of contentment? If you were to choose from an array of options, what are you likely to choose? If you were to come to the conclusion that one of the options doesn't fail and will be a rock of stability for your fulfillment and joy and stability, then clearly you would choose that. And so the article is a cultural commentary on how we've chosen things that are destined to fail, and thus we find ourselves in an age of psychological anxiety, distress, and lack of fulfillment. I think survey after survey, you can Google that people's reported happiness has declined over the last 50 to 100 years. So what does that have to do with Lent or Ash Wednesday? Some churches might say you have to choose between Ash Wednesday and Valentine's Day. You can't do both. But there was this article that said actually it's perfect that they land on the same day, because the love expressed through Christ dying on the cross is the most perfect love. What superior poetry can there be to celebrating a St. Valentine's Day love from Christ, the God enfleshed, dying for you and giving you unmerited, undeserved love that doesn't fail and doesn't pass away? So in that sense, I think it's incredible and wonderful. I love my wife. I recited the poem that I read out when I proposed to her 8 years ago. I recited it again this Valentine's Day. And so I celebrated the love I have for her, the affection I have for her. There have been and there will be. That love is fallible. My love for her is fallible. Her love for me is fallible. It's not perfect. But the love that God has for each of us and the covenant and the covenantal promises we made to each other before God ground us so that we place God above our marriage and follow Him and find our ultimate comfort and peace with Him. And so when we fail each other, we don't separate, we don't fall to pieces. We go to God and remember the promises we made and remember that He loves us